Yeah. 8 minutes done. Have you liked the session? Woo! Someone told me no jokes. That wasn't a joke. I hope you liked the session. So I'm so sorry my old surface didn't work in the stream. So sorry for people in the stream. It worked here, not there. Don't know what's up. This is Rick's machine.
Yeah, please don't break it.
Toads won't. Hey, nice to see you all here. I'm Sakari. I'm the CEO of Azure, I guess. And in this talk, I will tell you the timeline of what kind of concrete generative AI projects we've done during the last year and a half. So there's going to be a bit of an introduction into how we got here, into how I saw things as they evolved during this hype of AI. But then the further we get into the talk, the more we're going to talk about concrete projects and how we done those. After this talk, you will have at least, 5 to 10 different things that can be built and that have been built in Finland. So no large global references here. Azure is a company that solves business problems with technology since 2011. We have a lot of logos from Microsoft for it. We have 90 employees, a lot of experience, some awards, office in 3 countries, opening Netherlands hopefully soon, fully independent. There's nobody owning anything outside because this is a slide with text. I'm going to show you some faces. These are people. And to talk. What's the purpose with this slide? The purpose of this slide is to show that we are in a new uncharted territory. 2 years ago, you wouldn't have seen such a tweet. Now there's an author of a children's book. I checked this person writes children's books, hopefully many. And she's commenting on artificial intelligence, which tells us that when someone, especially from business side, says artificial intelligence today, what they're talking about is not machine learning of yore, which is still very relevant technology and excellent if you want to forecast something or predict something. They are usually talking about generative AI. My slide set here isn't correct. This machine is weird. Presenter view, what is? Oh, nice. How many of you have done something with AI to production? Show of hands. That's a goodly amount, let's say 30% of the room. I'd love to hear from your experiences if you are today at the party, for example, in the early evening, not the late evening. It all started, of course, with ChatGPT. You've seen this. They got a lot of users very quickly by American company OpenAI. And ChatGPT is based on the language model of GPT. And what is GPT? Pretty simply, it's a thing that takes an input sequence. It is not rocket. And then it comes out with a bunch of guesses. And it gives you the one it thinks fits the context the most. That's what large language models and small language models do in simplicity. Now, the OpenAI people have written a pretty nice document on GPT 3.5, which was the GPT model beneath ChatGPT when it got released end of November 2022. Pretty nice document on that, and that was released somewhere in 2018. There on the bottom of the slide, you can see this timeline. It will be there during the whole presentation, and you can see the time going forward. And some things happened before the timeline as the release of this document. So then the red bar is on the left corner. In this document, OpenAI people opened the architecture of GPT with this kind of an architecture diagram. And what this architecture diagram tells us, it tells us that everything we do with these large language models, it's pretty much, or it's only based on numbers. More explicitly, when you write a prompt and something goes inside this machine, there's a long vector created out of those tokens, those words, and then this machine creates a semantic understanding through those numbers. Semantic understanding means that if I write dog, or in Finnish koira, or hauva, or man's best friend, or hund, which is probably some language somewhere, they are all a vector, an array of floats that are pretty close to each other. That's all semantic meaning does. And this first step in this GPT architecture is the creation of these vectors so that these tokens can be recognized how close they are to each other. The next step is masked multi-self attention, which means that this machine looks at the words we've inputted and also the tokens and words it creates, and it detects which one it should focus on. So here it focused first on planet and then checked that, okay, and began to colonize, and now Earth was the next one. So we see that it starts, as it creates the story, it starts to focus on words it has generated itself. This is what attention does. And then the three next steps are normalizing the numbers so the gradients scale nicely, and feed forward is the step where all of the stuff you put in that machine, into OpenAI services, large language model, is pushed through the hidden layers of neural network. Feed forward means that all the data goes forward. There's no way to come back. Basically, this is a black box where you put stuff and something comes out, and nobody rightly knows what comes out before we see what has come out. That changes our projects in the sense that there's no person in this room who could promise a customer or someone that, okay, this is the stuff that will come out of this box. 99 times out of 100, it might be contextually meaningful, and then there's one time when it hallucinates weirdly and hardly and strongly and other adjectives. And that's exciting, but for us it creates the world where we cannot promise things that we could with SQL servers, for example. So, end of November 22, in the beginning of January, the Finnish national newspaper, Yle, I guess, wrote something. The first article I found that referred ChatGPT was about this. Science fiction has shaped our collective subconscious. That was beginning of 2023. In January, end of January, Microsoft invested $10 billion in OpenAI. They had invested $3 billion before that. So totally they've invested $13 billion. And with that, they got 49% ownership in the for-profit of OpenAI, thus gaining access, pretty much exclusive, I'm thinking, although now OpenAI has made a deal with Apple and so forth, but thus gaining access to all the models OpenAI has created. So there's the GPT models, right? There's DALL-E, the image generation. There's Whisper, which is speech to text. There's TTS, text to speech, and so forth. So OpenAI has created multiple models and keeps creating these. And Microsoft has big ownership in that stack. And when they invested, Microsoft sent or published this timeline of AI things they've published. And there you can see that in November 2022, they already had Azure OpenAI service. But that became generally available after this 10 billion investment beginning of last year. And there it just says ChatGPT coming soon. Shows the strength of a product name of ChatGPT. After January last year, ChatGPT had 100 million users globally. So in 2 months, they had become pretty pervasive. How many people here have used ChatGPT? This tells you that it's pretty pervasive. For people in front, like almost everybody raised their hands. There's a product that came out a year ago and almost everybody in the room has used it. That's something. And after this sprint to new users, Yle, this magazine in Finland, said something about ChatGPT. What on earth is ChatGPT with a space? At that point, beginning of March last year, in Finland, this product, this phenomenon of natural language processing, artificial intelligence, had become something that we were commonly aware of. But there were no business cases at that point, or at least I hadn't seen any. A little bit after, like a week after, Microsoft released ChatGPT as part of Azure OpenAI service. And a week after that, or so forth, OpenAI released GPT-4. And I think this is a meaningful slide, not because it would be fact anymore. It's not fact anymore because it's gotten a little old, because this is over a year old, and in artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence terms, it's very old. But I think this is meaningful in the sense that we can learn from this how these models progress. And as an example, I'm highlighting this AP art history, advanced placement art history part of American education system, where GPT 3.5, the blue bars, has received high marks, over 80% correct, and GPT-4 didn't exceed those numbers. So GPT-4 was no better than GPT 3.5. However, if you look at the uniform bar exam, which is the lawyer exam, there GPT 3.5 had 10% right, and GPT-4 had 90% right. I've used this slide for a year now. Some of you probably have seen this. Maybe you even heard me speak about this. But this is meaningful to me because to me this tells that it's very hard to identify superior models. In some cases, use cases, you have a specific use case in your project, and you might think, oh, let's use this, let's use that. But until you try it, it's very hard to say. Here, we have two technologies. One is 4 months newer than the other, and it was a lot better in some cases, not that much better in other cases. The other thing here, takeaway to me, is societal. I have 2 children. My daughter is 10, my son is 9. When they become a little bit older and they come to me and ask, hey, Dad, I'd like to be a lawyer. What will I answer when I know that already a year ago, a machine got 90% correct in uniform bar exam? On one hand, it's pretty clear that we will need people to mediate conflicts between groups of people. And that's what a lawyer is. They know the rules and they mediate the conflict. So there's some work, but there's a lot of lawyers that do NDAs and frame agreements. What's their future? What about accounting, credit and debit? AI will be able to do that stuff. It can do credit and debit. But there will always be need for a person who can advise organization financially, how to go forward, what's the next step. Development. The last talk in this room was from Cecilia on GitHub Copilot. And she coded a game, and pretty clearly she wasn't very good with Python. So development will change, as you well know. So that was the backdrop. Till March 14th or so, I at least, and Azure hadn't seen AI projects in a meaningful sense. But in March last year, that started to change a little bit. Maybe it was Yle, maybe it was the usage of ChatGPT, or whatever the reason. We started seeing interest, and we naturally were interested to understand the technical capabilities of this technology as well. And we started working with customers. The first projects, were they concrete? Of course, they were not. The first project's delivery was something like this, a foregrid of ideas for business, what they could do, how they could impact their company favorably with this technology. There's the red area that's high effort, low impact. Nobody wants to put money in those ideas. Luckily, in this workshop, I took the pictures from no ideas fell there, so we were facilitating it very successfully, I feel. Many ideas were in high impact, low effort, so very great pilot ideas for testing this capability. But no projects as such. Until the timeline jumped. You can see the red bar. It jumped like a month or so. So we did this business facilitation for a while, until early adopters, I feel, in Finland started to wake up due to different reasons why they wanted something concrete. The first that was clear to us was when a company senior leader called me and asked if we do Azure. And I said, we do Azure. And then he asked, isn't Azure capable of doing ChatGPT? And then I said, yes, it's capable of that. And then this person said, could you do as ChatGPT pronto in the company? And I said, Certainly. Why do you need it pronto? And then he said that he is the chief of the customer service and those kind of actions, and he has 300 people in India responsible for the global customer service. And he has started receiving emails from the customer service specialists. And these emails contain words like heartfelt and cumbersome. And from there he understood that these people don't use words like heartfelt and cumbersome. They must be using the public ChatGPT. And if you remember a year ago, there was some news that ChatGPT, the public one, leaked data because they used the questions and answers for training. And this chief was, of course, worried that some person would insert customer name in the chat and that would leak. So I said, of course, we can do a ChatGPT for your customer service. And we did. They wanted a Teams user experience. And then we knew that we would use Azure OpenAI service because that's where the ChatGPT, GPT 3.5 and GPT 4.0 at this point in time resided. Do you think this was a complex project? I can show you the whole architecture. It's here. All the components. It didn't take long. It wasn't a long project. The blob storage was for storing queries, the prompts and the answers for quality tracking reasons, which makes sense. We are talking about a global customer service organization. Otherwise, this project was 2 calendar weeks, 2.5, something like that, then it was in production. Very nice concrete project, but not that complex, and that was about a year ago. We did more business facilitation and started talking with some other companies if they need something like that, but then we went to holidays, right? We had well-earned holidays last year, and then after holidays we came back to work, and I was having a run in August, and I was listening to Lex Friedman's podcast, and he had Yuval Noah Harari as a guest. And this is another slide that I've used and thought about somewhat after that time. So Yuval was discussing artificial intelligence, and he's a philosopher, an author, a historian. And with Lex, they discussed this AI, the capabilities and risks. And Yuval was clear that there's some opportunities with technology, with the natural language processing, but he was worried. He was worried because we built society on language. Together we make contracts that are based on our common language. And suddenly there's a machine that can talk that language, that can execute those contracts. And Yuval said the following: AI is the first tool in history that can make decisions by itself, he said in the podcast. And now you might think if you agree with that or not. I think many of us are technical in the room. It's natural for us to think, okay, there's a sentence. Do I agree with the sentence or don't I agree with the sentence? And CTO of Azure, Sami, when I said this sentence to him, he said that's a stupid sentence. For a long time, computers have made decisions for human beings. For example, high-frequency trading is something no human being can be involved in. It's too fast. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is, for me, the point was there's a philosopher who is considering that this capability is threat on a level of changing the society, that it might lead to whole demographies being pushed out of their current jobs or ways of operating. To me, it was a sign of change. Change for the better, change for the worse. Change is always both. So for me, as a CEO of a company, that was okay. I don't know what this is, but this is something. And we need to be on top of this, like on the side of this, progressing with this thinking. So we continued discussing with companies what they wanted to build, and most companies at that stage last fall, they were thinking this. Many companies have had CEOs of the group or CEOs say to the leadership team, make sure that we don't fall off from the AI train, that we are part of the field of artificial intelligence. And then the leadership team says, excellent, Mrs. or Mr. CEO, what would you like to do with this artificial intelligence? And then the CEO says, I don't know, make sure that we are on it. And then the story trickles down to IT department, and the leadership team tells the IT department, be prepared for artificial intelligence. And the IT department asks, okay, what kind of things will we be prepared for? And then they're told, all kinds of things. Security things, and image generation things, and text generation things, and speech to text, and all kinds of things, which is, of course, impossible. That was the state of market last fall. Nobody knew who was chasing who, catch-22. Nobody knew what was possible, nobody knew what was beneficial, and nobody knew what should be the governance and policy around it. At the same time, Gartner released their hype cycle for generative AI, because why not? If you're familiar with hype cycle, it kind of tells us the state of a technology. The nodes there are different technical capabilities of generative AI. And on the right, there's plateau of productivity. If there was a node there, it would mean that it's in mainstream use. Before plateau of productivity, there's slope of enlightenment, no nodes, and before that is trough of disillusionment, so the valley of death. Last September, Gartner saw nothing was there. The first nodes there are GenAI-enabled virtual assistants and GenAI workload accelerators. I think we can put Copilot on those nodes. They are white, meaning that Gartner thinks that they will be in widespread use in less than 2 years. Almost all the other nodes of generative AI are not white. So it's over 2 years, or over 5 years, or even over 10 years until these are adopted to mainstream use. We'll get back to this a little bit later. We are now in September last year, and in September last year, this big concept of development related to RAG started, Retrieval Augmented Generation. Microsoft calls this Q&A engine. We at Azure have called this enterprise search. It's this idea that you can, with a natural language, you can find anything from your corporation, which is lovely because no other search has ever found anything anywhere, basically, in a corporate world. I don't know how can SharePoint and Teams searches be so bad, but I guess that's possible. This is something that was of interest to all companies. Anyone you spoke to, they were like, ooh, it would be nice to find data about products, customers, HR, when's my holiday? These kind of questions. How many of you are familiar with Retrieval Augmented Generation architecture, RAG architecture? I would say like 20% of hands or 15% of hands. So that's a basic pattern of the projects we do. When you get your first generative AI concrete project that you will build on, it might, or it probably has, some facets of this architecture. And it's quite simple. This diagram is from Wikipedia. There's nothing Microsoft on this diagram. First, what happens in RAG, there's a bunch of documents down there, and those documents are encoded, are vectorized to a vector database, meaning that the documents are changed into semantic long vectors of floats that I referred to earlier, of words like dog is the same as hund, and so forth. And then there's a question, someone asks a question, hey, I would like to know how I should behave when there's this kind of a project, and all the project documents have been loaded into vector database. This question is vectorized as well. And then we have the question and the data vectorized, and this machine can find out the closest matches from the vector numbers of documents that have content related to this question. All of that is pushed into LLM in the prompt, and the LLM GPT or some other LLM, Llama 3 or Cloud 3 or whatever LLM, reads all of that data and comes up with the answer. That's RAG. In Microsoft terms, for Azure AI Search, for example, Azure AI Search is one of the databases that's capable of vector storing, vector database. It's the same things. We push the documents as vectors into Azure AI Search, letting AI Search vectorize that. And then there's a question from some front end, from a user. And then that question is pushed into Azure AI Search, and it gives us a bunch of documents where the answer might be. And then we push the documents and the question with a prompt, please, Mr. GPT, find us the answer to this question from these documents, and bam, we got something. That's RAG in Microsoft environment simplified. That was September. That was the whole fall. From September to December and still ongoing, RAG is a big thing of interest. You will notice it in the architecture diagrams I'll soon show. What else happened in September? Whisper was announced. That's the OpenAI speech-to-text model. The quality increase was huge when that came out. It came from OpenAI, it came in 2022 or something. But to Microsoft, Azure OpenAI and Azure AI Speech, it came last September. And it's now generally available since March. So it's only been generally available since March. We've used it in production-ish environments before. Haven't had issues with support. But Whisper is nice. Whisper is nice because you can take your customer call like this and transcribe it, and it's quite nice quality. Here's a customer call in English to demo company, ShopSmart. And there's 1, 2 is different speaker. That's the customer and customer service specialists. Thank you, John. Let me just pull up your order details. I see your order here. Could you please describe the issue? Well, every time I turn it down, it starts to, for whichever reason, start to play mariachi music. That's the blender. Can't hear even the blender over the goddamn music. That's been blurred over because GPT model doesn't like nasty words like goddamn or chest. I hope you don't need to use the word chest in any place because it doesn't like the word chest. So this doesn't feel so special, but the thing is, it also worked with the same quality on Finnish since pretty much last September, which was a huge increase to many of us in this room. That there was suddenly a tool that understood Finnish when half of us in this room don't understand Finnish. It's a difficult language. Pretty flawless Finnish to people who don't speak Finnish, but this is pretty flawless. It recognizes numbers. Someone said a number on the phone, it wrote numbers. It recognized names and addresses. It capitalized them. And also in Finnish, you can say God damn it. That's not a bad word in Finnish, so that's nice too. There's no blurring of swear words in Finnish, which is nice. This coincided with the capability of ChatGPT being able to see, hear, and speak. That came out last September, which was, of course, some kind of a big picture, not surprise, but a feeling that, oh, now this app that I have in my pocket, I can talk to it and it responds. It felt a little magical. About there, the first UX, user experience related artificial intelligence project started, which was a new type. So I've told about the internal ChatGPT, and then there's been enterprise search. Now we got the first ones on user experience. These are by far the least common projects on generative AI. In this case, there's a medical diagnosis tool, and there's a bunch of symptoms the medical expert needs to check from drop-downs, and I put many drop-downs there because there's 30,000 symptoms in the database, and once they filled in all the symptoms, This app that the company has, it should tell the diagnosis. All the symptoms done, it's likely 1, 2, 3, one of these 3 diseases or things that this patient has. Now, what is possible and what we did with generative AI was turn it into following. Instead of the user doing drop down on 30,000 items, they dropped the patient report into the UI, and then those drop downs were populated from the patient report. And then if the drop downs were correct, the medical practitioner just said, go, give me the diagnosis. The architecture on it was the following. What you see here is the app before generative AI. Then we added Azure, and we added Azure OpenAI service, and we added a blob storage, and we added single Azure function, vectorization of symptoms, which had a serverless LandsDB vector database. I said earlier, Azure AI Search is a vector database, and so it is. LandsDB is a competitor. It's serverless, so it runs inside of the Azure function, which is nice. And whenever your Azure function is dead and cold, and you make a call to Azure function, LandsDB database is fetched, the state is fetched from blob storage, where it stores those vectors. So what this vectorization of symptoms function did, it vectorized the symptoms, which is surprising, of course. And it did that with Azure OpenAI services embedding API. The one we used was text embeddings 3 large, which is still the best performing one in Azure OpenAI service. So there's an API where you can send a bunch of text, unstructured text, and out comes vectors. And then you can store it in a bunch of vector databases, of which I think in Azure there's like 3 maybe now. There's Postgres, that was mentioned earlier. There's Cosmos DB, there's Azure AI Search, and this LandsDB, of course, this is from Microsoft, but it runs serverless nicely. 30,000 symptoms sounds a lot, but symptoms are short, so the database was quite small, so LandsDB in serverless worked fine. And the other bit was in the app when the user made the call with the patient report. That patient report was dropped into Azure OpenAI service, and Azure OpenAI service found symptoms from that text, block of text of the patient report, and sometimes that patient report was in Finnish. And what we realized, what we learned during the project is that even though vectorization should be multilingual, and it is, I said dog and koira in Finnish, they are the same vector pretty much. But dog and koira are very common words. They are part of a common vocabulary. Medical symptoms are not as common. In the training data set for large language model, there's a lot more medical symptom words in English than in Finnish. So the vectorization didn't really function as well when we tried to vectorize symptoms in Finnish and match them to English symptoms in database. How did we solve this? Well, we asked GPT model to translate the Finnish symptoms to English symptoms, and then we vectorized those translated symptoms, and then the vectorization worked. Which blows my mind about vectorization, but tells you a little bit about the training data set beneath the language model that you're going to run into these kind of, oh my God, it should work. But it doesn't because there's not that many symptom words for Finnish behind the system. We have LandsDB in both Azure functions, similarity search and vectorization, so both took the state from blob storage and had the same database. At the same time, these kind of projects started. A customer had 17,000 employees, and they did employee satisfaction survey with free text field. And then they got 10,000 free text messages why some employees were happy and weren't happy. And who read those 10,000 messages? Nobody, of course. But generative AI can read those messages and take the top 5 reasons why employees are not happy, what we need to improve in our company. When I asked Midjourney to create a picture of happy employees, it created this picture of a person who gets money thrown on her, which is Midjourney. Happy employees, is that the only place this kind of let's analyze a large bunch of survey results? Of course not. Happy customers, this is what Midjourney took us. Happy customers, they seem happy. If you do a qualitative survey on happy customers, you can analyze that. And if you are, I don't know, Fatser, and you do some chocolate bars, instead of doing NPS, Net Promoter Score, how likely are you to recommend this product to a person you know? You could have that. NPS doesn't go anywhere because it has benchmark, right? But you could also have an input box where someone says, oh yeah, I like Snickers because it's crunchy. And then generative AI could go through this. I fully predict that in a few years, we as consumers will start getting survey questions that are qualitative. Because now companies can analyze that with less human effort. So it's kind of doable. And in November, OpenAI pushed the boundary on their models again with the GPT-4 Turbo with 128K context, which is a different sounding update to ChatGPT can see, hear, and speak. Now it's getting a little bit more technical. Still, big update, 128K context is something we use in our projects because then you can send a longer prompt, and in retrieval augmented generation cases, the more documents you send with the prompt, the better the answer will be because the AI will have more context. And then we have the Ignite in November. That was the Copilot Ignite. In the Ignite's book of news last November, Microsoft said Copilot 289 times. So Microsoft clearly is pushing this AI, although from Microsoft it's pretty much, I feel it's a lot about Copilot, the product, which to me personally is less interesting than the cases I've been talking about, than the capability of building something on top of something. The next case is we are still in last year that we were involved in. The first was related to this long-running process of cancer treatments. Cancer is, of course, pretty common as those kind of diseases go. And I was part of a discussion where we looked at the problem of having multiple long-term cases with patients. And if the cancer is chronic, it doesn't go away. And sometimes the doctors change, and the nurses change, and the medication changes, and the feelings of the patient change. So there's a lot of unstructured prose and text in the case. Now, on any given one case, the doctors certainly know what's going on. But if there's 100 cases, who will read that data and look at similarities and differences between the changes of those treatments? Now, this technology can do that, which to me sounds pretty amazing. To me, it fills me with hope that we have technology that can, in the future, find out things that we simply haven't had the manpower for in the past. Similar takeaway is, of course, research and development. It's the same scenario, right? There's long-term development of a product in a company that the company uses millions or billions of dollars for. And then there might be parallel development processes. Comparing those processes and their outcomes and their steps is something this technology can do. On the RAG, last year there was one enterprise search project end of year where we found out that once again the vectorization didn't work. The previous one I told you about was about the language differences. This one was when we identified that the data the customer had was very company specific. Customer had a lot of data, but that data was filled with acronyms and information that was specific to this company, not generic, or common. So when there was a question to this enterprise search machine, what happened was that we had GPT 3.5 recognizing the keywords in the question, and then we did a keyword-based search on Azure AI Search. We couldn't do vectorization on this because the keywords in the questions could have been acronyms, and those don't vectorize nicely because they are not words that are in the training set of the GPT. They are made up characters. Then we returned top 10 documents. This helped with the, if the keywords are a bit hazy, we don't just return 1 or 2, but Azure AI Search returns multiple documents. So, out of those 10, what if 5 of them aren't really related to this question? If 5 of them are, that's fine, because we can send all 10 of those to GPT-4 Turbo to analyze the contents. Now, when I say documents, I mean chunks of 2 pages per chunk. So 10 documents is 20 pages of text. In a Turbo 4 128K context, you can fit 300 pages of text. We are talking about 20 pages here. So plenty of space. Points of interest in this project were, we tried half a page chunks first. They weren't as efficient. The machine LLM didn't really find the results as well. We raised that half a page to 2 pages, and it got more context and more quality. Vectorization didn't work. Enterprise policy prevented Sweden data center, which was 1 month of sending tickets, please allow Sweden data center. Team didn't have privileges to the resource group, which was a bummer, because we needed to debug and configure through screen share to the IT architects. So when we did testing, when something didn't work, that was done through deployment pipelines. Could this index in Azure AI Search work? Let's deploy a new version. We can't configure the resource directly. What this tells us, the project itself, the architecture itself is pretty simple. Sure, we had some learnings about vectorization, right? That's natural. But most of the issues had nothing to do with artificial intelligence and more to do with governance and the processes of the IT around the cloud platform, which is a thing many of us are familiar with. And I'm not saying they are easy to solve, they are not, but it's good to know. I'm going to go a little bit overboard, not a lot. In January, Microsoft brought Copilot to everybody per seat, which is nice. The next case we had that was new kind was for RFPs and sales. The situation in large companies that sell complex products like hardware, let's say they sell a mill or a paper plant, the specifications of those requirement documents can be hundreds or thousands of pages. So what happens is that there's one sad sales or engineering polar bear who reads all of those documents and then tries to respond to all the requirements and send that proposal to customer. How to ensure that we responded all the requirements when there's thousands of pages of material? Well, there's the sad sales or engineering polar bear who will read all of it twice to ensure everything has been responded to. This is a pretty clear example of what we can do with generative AI, right? We can find out the requirements from a hefty load of documents, and then we can compare our proposal with the RFP and find out if we have responded to requirements. At that point, Microsoft came out with a new and improved RAG, which is Graph RAG, half of February, which is simply a graph generated by LLM, meaning that instead of vectorizing the documents only, you can traverse to documents that have nearby understanding and information. So if you are working on RAG and you feel that the responses of the AI you are building aren't comprehensive enough, maybe you can look at this approach. What's fine is, why I believe this is true, is The data set they use to prove the correctness of this approach is aptly named violent incident information from news articles Viina. So it's easy to buy that. Rick Viina means booze in Finnish. Yes. Order analysis was the next in line, approximately. A company gets 100,000 orders a year. Some of them are images, because there are PDFs that have been scanned, and some of them are forms, and they come from multiple countries, and the order might say, give us 10 pieces of this. But the company only sells not pieces, but deciliters. And then the product code is wrong in the order. That takes time, manual time from someone to fix that and put it in SAP, right? So this machine, generative AI, can read those orders and try and analyze, okay, I recognize this line text, but the code is wrong. I recognize this line text, but the amounts are wrong, or something like that. Same thing works with invoice analysis. There's a customer that is a corporation of 200 companies. And when I asked why they need invoice analysis, they said, we have a lot of money, but we don't know where it comes from. So they have 200 companies that send invoices, but they don't know which of their offering is really selling. They have 8 service lines, and they send tens of thousands of invoices every month. They don't know to which service line each invoice belongs. Generative AI can read the rows of the invoices and pick those rows one by one and drop them in the service lines, if there's a nice description of those, and come up with a number telling this group of 200 companies what you are really selling. In April, Mustafa Suleyman, who is now part of Microsoft, did a 20-minute TED talk on AI is turning into something totally new. What is AI anyway? I urge you to look at it. It's not, don't expect anything mind-blowing, but to me, I found the contemplation of the role of AI in the future refreshing. I felt that he had good things to say about not to think of AI only as a tool, although in this presentation I'm speaking of AI mostly as a tool. But check that out if you have 20 minutes on your commute. Directly after that, in May, we got GPT-4 Omni. If you haven't tried it, it's quite fast. It's very fast to respond to your questions. It's just the responsiveness makes you feel that it's a little bit more human-like. It's available in some regions from Azure, only US, not elsewhere yet. And it's kind of nice, it's half the price of GPT-4 Turbo at this point in time. But of course only in US right now. But it's available in Azure. The next example I have is maintenance intelligence. You make a maintenance request. I don't know, maybe your car broke, maybe your mining equipment broke, maybe your welding machine broke, maybe your printer broke, like in this example, machine broke in the middle and things spilled and you know it's not working. It's the maintenance request, Epson inkjet printer. I don't know if Epson does inkjet. In the past, what would the maintenance person do? They would maybe have experience of this same situation and they would start fixing it or trying to find out what's wrong. Now with generative AI, with this information, we can look through all the maintenance cases this company has ever done, find out semantically meaningful, relatable, similar cases, and create a list of those that show us actions executed and spare parts ordered. Yeah, some of the tickets are older. That's true. Which I think is, once again, we are talking about RAG. We are still talking about RAG or graph RAG, but we are still talking about vectorization and similarity search. But the world is changing. These examples of projects will point by point change the world around us. And this is something many of us are familiar with, an older meme. little Bobby tables. So Tuomas, who sits somewhere from our company, found an updated version of this. Little Billy ignore instructions. Everywhere we see little signs of this capability changing some small part of society. And where we saw a lot of signs is by this dude. This dude opened Microsoft Build conference. You might have seen the keynote, and that was AI only. Like Ignite before, that was Copilot only. This was AI only. Well, there was a little piece of fabric maybe, and I understood that Jussi was very excited when virtual machines can be hibernated so that they don't cost anymore, but that didn't get to Book of News, so maybe that big of a thing. Microsoft is very interested in AI, and that's for a reason. The Book of News books links came there, and the reason is share value. It was 240, to remind you, in the beginning slide. Now it's 413. That means that the market value of Microsoft has gone up by 1.3 trillion in a year and a half. Have they really produced concrete stuff at that pace? I don't think so. This is the AI. So what did Satya say? Satya said that GPT-4o came out in Azure the same day it came out from OpenAI. That must have been planned, I think. 49% ownership does allow for some say in matters, I guess. Also, it's not just OpenAI Azure is resting on. There's plenty of other models available, all the best ones you can get there. And in addition, Microsoft are doing their own. Phi 3 is what we call small language model, SLM. The smallest Phi 3, which is getting quite efficient, takes like 4 gigs of memory, which is, I could have it in my mobile phone, you could have it in your mobile phones too. Not just mobile phones, you could have it in your car, easily. You could have it in your welding machine that we spoke of earlier. You could have it in your home drill. Please don't drill, there's a pipe in front of you. And in addition, there's the Hugging Face, which is the community for models. 1,400 models you can get from Hugging Face to Azure if you are thinking of let's go through all the models and pick the best, which doesn't make sense right at this point. If you start building something, just build it and then think of the models later. Hugging Face has, in entirety, it has 700,000 models. So this 1,400 that is available in Azure is just a fraction, but I think we are pretty happy with even 1,400. 1,700,000 sounds like a lot. Last concrete example, I've now done 54 minutes. The last example is a generic document analysis. Let's think of contracts. Contract comes to a company and your legal department wants to know what are the liabilities, when is this in force, what's the scope, and these kind of things. And there could be an UI where you add what you want from the document. And building this would look like something like this. There's probably a service bus queue that gets the message that there's now a new document and we need to find these things from this document. There's a document processor serverless function, Azure function, that gets the details of the file from probably a relational database. And then it gets the file, URI, from the document storage. And then because that file can probably be an image, in addition to being a form, that is sent to Azure Document Intelligence, which is a pretty nice tool because with the layout model, you can get the file out as markdown. So for example, if there's a table of RASI or some other responsibilities, you can get that table out as a markdown. It costs €1 per 100 pages, so it's pretty expensive, this service, but still markdown, that's priceless. And when you have all of this information, you have the questions, you have the document in a textual format, in a structured format, You push all of that into a GPT model, which does the analysis and gives you the responses to the questions you sent. Pretty close to RAG thinking with the vectorization. Now, there's no vectorization here. It will be necessary if the documents get longer. So where are the companies now? I don't know, maybe I've told like 7, 8 examples of projects we've done or we are working on. And I said last fall the companies didn't really know where they're going. Now they kind of know, but still a lot of companies are here. So nobody's late. A lot of companies where you work at or you work for are in the first steps of starting to look at this technology. And they don't rightly know what they should do next. The projects we went through are on the right. And the 4 takeaways from my presentation are: concreteness is up. I think that's a welcome news to all of us in this room. There's more projects now than there were half a year ago and a year ago. So that's up. Disappointments are ahead. There are multiple things that don't work, so expect disappointments. Don't sell too cheaply, I guess. AI will be part of the back end of many solutions. Vectorization, just for the search capability of your app, will be a regular occurrence in the future. And the last one is that next year will be the year of first real projects. I consider these projects I just presented as quite small, experimental. None of them were very long. Sorry for the hassle in the beginning, and thank you everybody for the audience.